I never imagined my own husband could betray me this way. One evening, I was going through my mail and decided to check my credit card statement. At first, I thought I was mistaken, but as I stared at the numbers, my heart sank. There were charges I didn't recognize, hundreds of dollars spent on things I had never seen him buy before. Luxury handbags, designer watches, high-end shoes, all purchased without a word to me. I sat there, frozen, trying to convince myself it had to be a mistake. But deep down, a knot of fear and disbelief tightened in my stomach. How could someone I trusted so completely hide something like this from me? And even worse, he must have thought I'd never notice. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing thoughts. My name is Jessica Carter, I'm 32, and I've always considered myself responsible with money and careful with our life together. I've built my career steadily over the years, juggling long hours and deadlines, and I thought Ethan, my husband of 7 years, was equally conscientious. He's 35, charming, and I had no reason to doubt his character. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect couple. Our friends would comment on how well we had it together, how stable we were. Our home was comfortable, bills paid on time, and life had a sense of security I never wanted to take for granted. That evening, as I stared at the charges, my mind replayed small details from the past few months, little things that now seemed suspicious. The way he sometimes got defensive when I asked about money. The times he seemed unusually distracted or secretive about where he had been. At the time, I had shrugged these off, trusting that everything was fine, that he was stressed at work or tired from life. But now, those tiny moments formed a trail, leading directly to this shocking truth. I felt a mix of anger and confusion. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, but another part knew I needed to understand the full picture first. How long had this been happening? How much had he spent? And why? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my heart was pounding, and the sense of betrayal was suffocating. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, statement in hand, feeling completely alone in the room that was supposed to be safe. I kept thinking about our life together, the trust one had placed in him, and how easily it seemed to have been shattered. The more I stared at the numbers, the more I realized this wasn't a small mistake or a one-time lapse. It was deliberate, calculated, and hidden from me. And as much as I wanted to deny it, the truth was staring me in the face. That night, I resolved to get to the bottom of it. I needed answers, and I needed to protect myself. I didn't know yet what this journey would cost me emotionally or how far it would take me. But one thing was certain. My life, as I had known it, was about to change forever. The next morning, I decided to bring up the charges with Ethan, trying to keep my voice calm and casual. I didn't want to start an argument before I had all the facts, so I phrased it lightly. "Hey, I noticed some unusual charges on my credit card," I said, hoping he would have a simple explanation. He looked at me with wide eyes, a mix of surprise and guilt on his face. "What? That can't be right," he said quickly. "It must be some mistake with the bank. I didn't touch your card, I promise." His reaction made me hesitate. Part of me wanted to believe him, to chalk it up to an error. After all, I had always trusted him completely. He sounded convincing, and I didn't want to think the worst about the man I had married. I nodded, telling myself I might just check with the bank before worrying too much. But deep down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. Over the next few days, small things started to make me suspicious again. I noticed that some receipts were missing from the kitchen counter, ones I usually kept for my records. I found myself asking questions about errands he said he had run, and sometimes his answers didn't match what I thought I knew. Late at night, I would hear his phone buzzing quietly, and he would quickly step out of the room to answer, saying it was work. The little details that I had ignored before began adding up, forming a pattern I didn't like. I felt confused. Part of me wanted to confront him again, to demand the truth, but another part of me was in denial. I didn't want to accept that the person I loved and trusted could lie to me so easily. I kept telling myself that maybe I was overreacting, that there had to be an explanation. Maybe the charges were mistakes, maybe the receipts were misplaced, maybe the late calls were really work-related. I clung to those possibilities, trying to quiet the nagging voice in my head that warned me something was wrong. Still, the tension in the house was growing, even if neither of us spoke about it directly. I watched him more closely, noticing how he avoided certain topics and how often he seemed preoccupied with things I couldn't see. I felt my confidence in him shake, even as I tried to push the doubts away. It was a strange mix of fear, confusion, and hope. The hope that everything was innocent, the fear that it wasn't. By the end of the week, I realized that my denial was only making things worse. The inconsistencies were piling up, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. I needed to find out the truth for myself, even if it meant confronting a reality I didn't want to face. The unease I had tried to dismiss was now impossible to ignore, and I knew I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. I decided I couldn't rely on his explanations anymore. I needed to see the full picture for myself. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and my bank statements spread out in front of me. I logged into our online accounts, carefully going through every transaction over the past few months. At first, I looked for small, suspicious charges, but what I found made my stomach drop. There were purchases I couldn't believe. High-end handbags, designer shoes, expensive watches, and even some electronics, all bought using my credit card. The total added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Each item I discovered felt like a punch to the chest. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, unable to understand how he could have done this without me knowing. These weren't small, accidental charges. This was deliberate, planned, and hidden. As I dug further, the pattern became clear. Ethan had been doing this for months, carefully spacing out the purchases and covering his tracks. He had lied about work trips, about errands, even about casual spending habits. Every story he had told me about where our money went now seemed like a lie designed to distract me. I felt like I had been living with a stranger all this time, someone who had worn my husband's face, but had no respect for our life together. The betrayal hit me harder than I expected. I felt heartbroken, not just about the money, but about the trust that had been broken. This wasn't just about luxury goods. It was about the fact that the person I loved had been lying to me, manipulating me, and taking advantage of my trust. Anger rose in me, fierce and hot, mingled with disbelief. How could he think he could get away with this? How could he betray me in a way so calculated and cruel? I also felt a deep sadness, a mourning for the life I thought we had. I remembered the moments we had shared, the plans we had made, the sense of partnership I had believed in. It all felt tainted now, like the foundation of our marriage had been built on lies I hadn't seen. I couldn't stop thinking about the hours I had spent working, trusting him to be responsible, while he secretly drained my accounts. Despite the heartbreak, a sense of determination began to grow. I realized I couldn't let this go. I had to face the truth, even if it was painful. I needed to understand how far this had gone and prepare for what I would do next. Sitting there, looking at the statements and the receipts, I felt a mix of betrayal, anger, and a flicker of resolve. I knew this was only the beginning of uncovering the full extent of his deceit, and I also knew I had to be careful. The night stretched on as I continued to dig, piecing together months of lies and hidden spending. Every discovery made me angrier, but it also made me more alert, more aware. I realized that this betrayal had shaken me deeply, but it had also awakened a part of me that refused to be a victim. I wasn't sure what I would do yet, but I knew one thing. Ethan had underestimated me, and I wouldn't let him get away with this. The next day, I felt like I couldn't carry the weight of what I had discovered on my own. I needed someone to talk to, someone I trusted completely. I called my best friend Megan Lawson, who had been my rock for years. Megan is 31, smart, and fiercely loyal. When I told her everything about the credit card charges, the hidden purchases, and the lies, she was shocked. Her voice was calm but firm, and she made it clear that I didn't have to face this alone. "You can't let him keep doing this," Megan said. "You need to confront him, but you also need to protect yourself first. Make sure you know exactly what's going on and what steps you're going to take before you say anything." Her words made sense, and I felt a spark of clarity for the first time in days. Talking to her lifted some of the heavy isolation I had been feeling. Just hearing her voice and knowing she believed me made the betrayal feel a little less overwhelming. Megan asked detailed questions, helping me think through what I knew and what I still needed to uncover. She encouraged me to organize all the evidence I had found, bank statements, receipts, and any information about suspicious trips or purchases. She reminded me that I had the right to protect myself and our money, and that I didn't have to act impulsively. Her support made me feel stronger, more focused, and less alone. After our conversation, I started making a plan. I began thinking practically about the steps I could take to safeguard my finances. I considered freezing my accounts, changing passwords, and tracking every transaction closely. I realized that I needed to be strategic, not just emotional, if I wanted to handle this properly. Megan helped me weigh my options and reminded me to stay calm, even though my emotions were a storm inside me. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the loneliness I felt. I had trusted Ethan completely, and now it was clear that trust had been shattered. I felt isolated, sitting in my home with the knowledge of his betrayal, unsure of what he might do next. Yet, talking to Megan reminded me that I wasn't powerless. I had allies, people who cared about me and would stand by me while I navigated this. By the end of the day, I had a clearer sense of direction. I knew I needed to confront Ethan eventually, but I also knew I couldn't do it blindly. I had to protect myself and be ready for whatever came next. Megan's support gave me the courage to move forward and the confidence to believe that I could take control of the situation. Even though I felt hurt and betrayed, I also felt stronger, knowing that I wasn't facing this alone. For the first time since discovering the charges, I felt a sense of purpose. The isolation was still there, but it was balanced by the reassurance that I had a friend who truly had my back. I realized that, even in the darkest moments of betrayal, trusted friendship could give me the strength to start reclaiming control of my life. A few days later, I decided it was time to confront Ethan. I gathered the evidence I had collected, the bank statements, receipts, and a list of all the suspicious purchases. I waited until we were alone in the living room and took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, holding the papers in my hand. "I know about the charges on my credit card. I know about the luxury items you've been buying without telling me." He looked at me, his expression shifting quickly from surprise to defensiveness. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "I don't know what you mean. Maybe it's just a mistake, or the bank messed up." I shook my head, holding the papers tighter. "This isn't a mistake, Ethan. I have the statements, the receipts. All of this points to you." For a moment, he seemed flustered, but then he leaned back and tried to minimize the situation. "Jessica, it's not a big deal. I was just stressed at work, and I needed a little break. It was harmless, just a little fun. You're overreacting." His words hit me like a wave. He was trying to make me doubt myself, make me feel guilty for confronting him. I realized he was gaslighting me, twisting the truth to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. How could someone act so calmly after betraying trust so completely? For a moment, I questioned if I had misread things, but the evidence in my hands was undeniable. Every purchase, every hidden charge, every lie he had told me was right there. Yet he spoke as if it was a minor issue, something trivial to be brushed aside. Despite the anger and disbelief swirling inside me, I felt a quiet determination growing. Ethan may have thought I was naive, that I would let this slide or forgive too easily, but he didn't know me as well as he thought. I realized that I had to be careful, to plan my next step strategically. Reacting out of emotion could give him the upper hand, and I wasn't willing to let that happen. As he continued to talk, trying to distract me with excuses and false charm, I focused on controlling my own response. I stayed calm on the outside, listening, but inside I was already plotting how to reclaim control over the situation. I thought about all the ways I could protect myself, recover what he had taken, and hold him accountable. By the end of the conversation, Ethan seemed to believe he had deflected the confrontation. He relaxed, smiling slightly, thinking I had bought into his story. But the truth was very different. I knew exactly what he had done, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. In that moment of apparent calm, I made a silent vow. I would not let this betrayal define me. I would be the one in control, and Ethan would face the consequences of his actions sooner or later. I knew I couldn't confront Ethan again without being fully prepared. His calm excuses and lies had shown me that he would try to twist the truth to make me look like I was overreacting. I decided I needed more solid proof, something undeniable that would leave him with no room to deny what he had done. After thinking it over, I considered hiring a private investigator, but I also knew I could gather a lot of information myself if I was careful and methodical. I started keeping a detailed record of every suspicious charge and purchase. I went through old receipts, credit card statements, and even shipping notifications that had arrived at our home. Each piece I found added to the picture, showing not just random spending, but a pattern of deliberate deception. It became clear that Ethan had been planning these purchases carefully, hiding them from me, and lying about where he had been. The more I looked, the angrier I became, but at the same time, I felt a sense of empowerment. Every bit of evidence I collected was a tool, something I could use to take control of the situation. I realized that I didn't have to be a victim. I could expose the truth in a way that would make it impossible for Ethan to continue his lies, and it would hit him where it hurt the most, his credibility and control. As I dug deeper, I discovered that some of the trips he had claimed were work-related were completely false. He had used them as cover for shopping sprees, traveling to stores or cities where he could make purchases without me noticing. Seeing the full extent of his lies made my anger grow, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just dealing with hidden spending. I was dealing with months of manipulation and deception, and I was determined to confront it on my terms. I began planning carefully. I thought about the best way to present the evidence so that he could no longer deny it. I made notes of every purchase, every false trip, and every lie he had told. I considered the timing, the people who might need to know, and the consequences I wanted him to face. I wanted the confrontation to be precise, undeniable, and final. Even as the anger burned inside me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The planning and collecting of evidence gave me control over a situation that had once felt completely chaotic. Each piece of proof I added to my folder made me feel stronger, more capable, and less vulnerable. I realized that Ethan had underestimated me, thinking I would stay quiet or forgive too easily, but I was already preparing my move. By the end of the week, I had a complete record of his deceit. I knew everything he had done, and I knew how I could confront him in a way that would leave no room for excuses. I felt a mix of anger, satisfaction, and quiet confidence. I was ready to take the next step, and this time, I would make sure he couldn't manipulate the truth again. Once I had all the evidence, I realized I needed to make Ethan feel the weight of his actions beyond just me. He had hidden everything so carefully, but his lies weren't meant to stay secret forever. I decided to approach some of his close friends and family subtly, sharing parts of the proof without making it a public spectacle. I didn't want to humiliate him outright at first, but I wanted people he trusted to understand the truth. I met with his sister, Lauren, and one of his longtime friends, Mark, over coffee separately. I showed them the statements and receipts, explaining what I had discovered. At first, they couldn't believe it. They looked shocked, asking if I was sure, and I calmly walked them through the evidence. Each detail, each lie was laid out clearly. Slowly, I could see the doubt and disbelief turn into concern and anger. They realized that Ethan had been hiding a serious betrayal, and they began to distance themselves from him, questioning his honesty and integrity. It was a strange feeling to see the reactions of people who had known him for years. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication. The truth was finally coming out, and the people he cared about were realizing the extent of his deceit. It was empowering to see him losing some of the control he had maintained for so long. On the other hand, I also felt a deep sorrow. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, relationships, and the image of the person he pretended to be. Seeing his friends and family shocked and disappointed made the betrayal feel even heavier. After these meetings, I noticed subtle changes in Ethan's behavior. He became quieter, more guarded, and a little on edge. I could sense that he was starting to realize I was no longer the only one aware of his lies. He didn't know exactly what I had shared, but he could feel the shift. The control he thought he had over the narrative was slipping, and that made him nervous. Even as I watched him become uneasy, I remained composed. I didn't confront him directly yet, but I let my calm confidence speak for itself. Each interaction I had with his friends and family strengthened my position. I was no longer isolated in this betrayal. Others now knew, and the social pressure was mounting in a way that Ethan hadn't expected. I also started thinking about the next steps. With his inner circle aware of the truth, I had a foundation to confront him fully, with people around who understood the reality. The tension in the house was palpable. He tried to maintain his usual charm and composure, but small signs of panic showed through. By the end of this stage, I felt a mixture of relief, empowerment, and sadness. The betrayal was no longer mine alone to bear. Ethan was feeling the consequences socially, and I could finally see the situation beginning to shift in my favor. I knew the next confrontation would be decisive, and I was ready for it. After seeing the reactions of his friends and family, I knew it was time to take practical steps to protect myself. I scheduled a discreet meeting with a financial advisor and a lawyer I trusted. I explained the situation without letting Ethan suspect anything, making it clear that I needed guidance on how to secure my finances and take action against the unauthorized spending. Their advice was straightforward and empowering. They helped me understand exactly what I could do to reclaim control over my money and prevent further misuse. Following their guidance, I began freezing joint accounts and canceling credit cards that Ethan had access to. I made sure to update passwords and set alerts for any transactions. I also worked on tracing all the funds that had been spent without my permission, making notes of where the money had gone and how to recover it. Every step I took made me feel stronger, more in control, and less like a victim. For the first time in months, I felt that I was actively turning the tables. Ethan had no idea I was doing all this. He continued with his usual routine, completely unaware that the financial safety nets he had relied on were being dismantled. I watched him carefully, noting how relaxed he seemed, thinking everything was fine. The contrast between his ignorance and my awareness filled me with quiet satisfaction. I was preparing for the moment when the truth would hit him in a way he couldn't ignore. The process of reclaiming the funds and securing the accounts was methodical. I followed each step carefully, making sure nothing could be undone or challenged easily. I documented every change, every transaction, and every communication with the bank and financial institutions. It was meticulous work, but it gave me a sense of purpose and control I hadn't felt since discovering his betrayal. As I went through these maneuvers, I realized how empowering it felt to take action. The fear and helplessness I had experienced were replaced by confidence. I knew that Ethan's access to our finances was no longer unlimited, and that realization was liberating. I could finally see that I had the upper hand, not through anger alone, but through careful planning and decisive action. By the time I had completed these steps, I was ready to confront him with not only the evidence of his lies, but also the reality that he no longer had control over our finances. It was a turning point. I had transformed from someone blindsided by betrayal into someone who could act strategically and decisively. The sense of empowerment was overwhelming. I knew that the next confrontation wouldn't just be emotional. It would also carry the weight of real consequences. I felt prepared, confident, and in control. For the first time since discovering Ethan's secret spending, I felt that I had reclaimed my life, my money, and my sense of power. The betrayal that had once left me feeling powerless was now an opportunity to prove my strength and resolve. I decided it was time for the final confrontation. I gathered all the evidence I had collected: bank statements, receipts, lists of false trips, and a full record of the money Ethan had spent without my knowledge. I asked Megan to be present for support, knowing that having a witness would help me stay calm and firm. When Ethan came home that evening, I was ready. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. I laid out the evidence in front of him, piece by piece, explaining exactly what I had discovered. At first, he tried to deflect, insisting that it was just a misunderstanding, that some of the charges were mistakes, and that I was overreacting. I listened, letting him speak, but I didn't respond to his excuses. Each lie he told was met with clear, undeniable proof. As I went through the documents, I could see his confidence slipping. His face changed from casual calm to shock, then to panic. He tried to talk over me, to twist the story, but the evidence was too strong. Every charge, every hidden purchase, every lie about work trips, all laid out in black and white, left him with nowhere to hide. It was the first time I had seen him truly cornered, and I felt a mix of satisfaction and anger. When he finally fell silent, I spoke clearly and firmly. "Ethan, this isn't just about the money. It's about trust, respect, and the life we built together. You've broken that in ways I can't ignore. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You have two choices. Either we separate and rebuild our lives apart, or you commit to rebuilding this marriage on my terms, with complete honesty, accountability, and transparency. Anything less is not acceptable." I could see the realization hitting him. He had underestimated me, thinking I would accept excuses or ignore the betrayal. Now, faced with the full truth and the strength of my resolve, he looked defeated. There was shock in his eyes, a mix of fear and regret, as he finally understood the consequences of his actions. The tension in the room was palpable, every second stretching with the weight of everything we had been through. I felt a rush of emotion myself: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. This confrontation, long delayed, finally gave me a voice to express all the hurt and betrayal I had carried silently. The emotional catharsis was overwhelming, but it also left me feeling stronger. I knew I had taken control, faced the truth head-on, and set the boundaries that were necessary for my life moving forward. By the end of the conversation, Ethan remained silent, aware that he could no longer manipulate or deceive me. I had drawn a clear line, and he had no choice but to face the reality he had created. The dramatic tension in the room was intense, but I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. I had confronted the betrayal fully, and in doing so, I reclaimed my power. After the final confrontation, I knew there was no going back to the way things were. Trust had been broken too deeply, and I couldn't ignore what Ethan had done. I made the difficult decision to separate from him. It wasn't easy, and part of me mourned the life I had imagined with him, but I also felt a sense of clarity. This was the step I needed to reclaim control over my life and move forward on my own terms. Once the separation was underway, I focused on rebuilding my finances. I closed joint accounts completely, consolidated my resources, and created a budget that allowed me to feel secure again. I invested in things that mattered to me, my career, personal growth, and a small savings plan for the future. Each step I took was a reminder that I didn't need to rely on someone else to feel stable or secure. I was capable of creating the life I wanted, free from deceit and manipulation. I also dedicated myself to my work. The long hours, the effort, and the focus I had always given my career now felt even more meaningful. I threw myself into projects and responsibilities that allowed me to grow professionally and prove to myself that I was more than the situation I had endured. Success in my work gave me confidence and a renewed sense of purpose. It reminded me that I could thrive even after betrayal, and that my life didn't have to revolve around the mistakes of someone else. Meanwhile, the consequences of Ethan's actions began to unfold naturally. Friends and family who had once supported him now kept their distance, aware of the lies he had told and the betrayal he had committed. Financially, he no longer had free access to our shared resources, and the evidence I had collected ensured that he couldn't manipulate the situation to his advantage. Watching him face the results of his actions was not about revenge. It was about justice and fairness. As weeks turned into months, I felt a deep sense of empowerment. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I had turned it into motivation to rebuild, to take charge of my own life, and to focus on what truly mattered: my well-being, my independence, and my future. I felt lighter, stronger, and more in tune with my own needs and desires. Looking back, I realized that betrayal had hurt me, but it had also made me stronger. I had learned to trust my instincts, to take action when something was wrong, and to stand up for myself without fear. Revenge, I understood, wasn't about hurting him. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my dignity. I had survived the deception, faced the consequences with clarity and courage, and emerged victorious in my own right. In the end, I felt closure. The chapter with Ethan had ended, and a new one had begun. One where I was the author of my own story, free from lies, empowered by my actions, and confident in the life I was building for myself.